You've got to have owners and managers that care about this. So it's definitely a culture. Everybody talks about the culture of a restaurant or bar or business, but the culture has to be, we hate minors, get them out of our bar. If that's where you're at, that's kind of has to start there.
Hello and welcome to the Bar Business Podcast, where we help bar owners increase profits, attract loyal guests, and simplify operations so you can avoid burnout and finally enjoy your life outside of your bar. I'm your host, Chris Schneider, the Bar Business Coach. Before we get started, a quick thank you to our sponsors, Spot On, who provide a great modern POS solution for the bar and restaurant industry, and Starfish, who use AI to turn your books into actionable steps to increase profits. So one thing that's always hard for bar owners is making sure that their team is appropriately IDing everyone and not serving anybody underage. And from a business standpoint, it's really hard to overstate the importance of properly IDing people because it literally can mean the end of your bar. And we're in a business where compliance is absolutely important and crucial to our existence. So with that in mind, joining us today is Cliff Crider. Cliff is the owner of Stinger Compliance and Truck and Tap. He is a veteran of our industry. He started Truck and Tap about a decade ago in Woodstock, Georgia, and has grown to, I believe, 4 locations. And recently he launched Stinger Compliance, which is to help other bars and restaurants ensure they're staying compliant with underage drinking, ID laws, all of that sort of good stuff. So Cliff, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
And before we get into Stinger Compliance and talking about IDs and all that boring stuff, I think everybody listening would be a little bit interested in your story, how you got to where you are, how you took Truck and Tap from an idea to 4 locations. So fill us in a little bit on Truck and Tap and your journey there.
Yeah, it's like 2006 or 5 or 4. Geez, I don't even know now. I bought a building in downtown Woodstock that was on the main street and didn't really know what to do with it, but had a couple of ideas. So I gathered 2 guys I knew from real estate, really. One guy from real estate, one guy from a growler store down the street. And we cobbled together this beer bar with food truck concept. I mean, it was kind of, we're throwing kind of darts at a board, really. Jack had a growler shop down the street that was wildly successful. And Mitch had a commissary kitchen that he hosted food trucks. So we put those 2 together, and it was kind of rock and roll. It just took off from there.
Well, that's fantastic. And because I know a lot of folks listening to the podcast, a lot of them are early in their journey or they're looking to get into the business. And as someone who's gone from 1 location to 4 locations, is there anything about that growth that you think is important for people to understand and how you build in this industry?
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting. I was a real estate guy. I had a commercial real estate appraisal firm. I wasn't out there looking to build a bar. I hadn't done this kind of line of work since, I was 25. I mean, I was an industry kid. I worked in Roy Rogers at 15, and I worked all the way up through a place in Orlando called Church Street Station. So I had it in my blood, but it wasn't like I was looking to do it. So when we found the space, it was basically we had a space in search of a use. So we got this great little piece of real estate. What can we do with it? So then you go through the whole process. It's almost like a highest and best use analysis. What can you put here? And I just happened to land on 2 really good partners. The perfect timing. Food trucks were coming along. Craft beer was coming along. Those guys were good operators. It was just a power trio. And I'm like, like Black Sabbath, if you will. I don't know if they're a trio, but so it worked. The foundation of this was Zach, who was very idealistic on his beer choices. I mean, he was over the top of what actually got put on our beer board. And it was almost like if a craft beer got onto our board, it was a good day for that brewer, right? So that was in and of itself the quality of what we served. And mind you, we were only craft beer at the very beginning. So we didn't have all the spirits that we have. So we sort of pivoted. So that's one thing. You got to, start with quality. You got to pivot. If things aren't going wrong, you got to pivot. But Mitch and I were real estate guys. And so I followed the mantra of like Burger King following McDonald's, or, you've got to go where the water's warm, and you got to go where someone already paved the way. So we look for vibrant downtown city centers in the suburbs. That was just our model. We didn't want to be cool in the city. We wanted to be cool in the suburbs. So we stick to that model. Mitch and I were real estate guys, so we went out and selected our real estate. We didn't, you didn't find for sale signs and say, I'll take it. That's perfect. You had to take sniper shots at real estate. So that was part of it. And then, we look like a dirty little dive bar, but we've got great ops. It's like that little transformer car, Bumblebee. It's a crappy Camaro on the outside, but on the inside, it's a highly tuned engine. And I know that you're really big on that. You got to know, what your costs are. You got to know what your prices are, what your margins, what your variance and your loss. All that has to be in touch.
100%. And it feels like that kind of attention to detail, I imagine, is part of what led you to striker compliance.
Yeah,
And
Stringer.
I'm sorry,
Stinger. Actually, that's a good name.
Stinger.
But
Oh,
so what I think happened is, we just got to the point where it was like, okay, well, what do we need to work on next? You're constantly polishing things, and I think that's my personality here. Is I like just to kind of get something to where it is, and then just keep polishing it. You can't go from 0 to 100. You got to go 0 to 70. And then you start working on getting it better and better and better. Sports are like that, right? If you can't hit a serve, you got to start slow, and you got to, if you're playing the
mhm.
drums, you got to start slow, and you get the rhythm, and you go faster. So we're constantly polishing our business model here. And if you pop in on a bar and you see a couple of young faces over spring break or over Thanksgiving, you got to ask yourself, are we doing everything that we need to do to check these IDs to make sure that we're not, because I was a kid too. I knew how to get into the bars. I mean, I would
Yeah.
walk in backwards through the exit door. I would sneak in through the back. I would steal the bouncer's stamp, and I would stamp my own hand. I would go to the store and get the invisible ink. It
Mm.
did everything. So I knew, you know, how to do things. So we just started mitigating our risks of being in the business of selling an age restricted product, a highly sought after bar and highly sought after alcohol. We just started combating that more effectively, and it led to Stinger compliance. Yeah, for sure.
So before we dive into Stinger compliance and what exactly you guys do there, let's talk a little bit about just kind of IDs checking and compliance in general here. Because I think for a lot of bar owners, particularly those people newer to the industry, it's a very scary thing. Because like I mentioned at the top, it can just put you out of business altogether if you don't follow it. But also, it's very complex. Because when you and I were talking before, we have 50 different states that have 50 different IDs. This is not an easy system necessarily to navigate. So, what should bars and restaurants be doing to make sure they're not coming out of compliance, that they're staying in compliance?
Yeah. So that's a kind of a long-winded answer, right? I think it
Yeah.
starts from the top. You've got to have owners and managers that care about this. So it's definitely a culture. Everybody talks
Mhm.
about the culture of a restaurant or bar or business, but the culture has to be, we hate minors. Get them out of our bar. If that's where you're at, that's kind of has to start there. And that's where you talk about, well, if you're a restaurant, you can't really hate minors. You got to hate the
Right.
minors trying to get the alcohol, right? You can't hate the minor trying to get a hamburger. But you run the risk when you are a restaurant, and you use, like, let's just say, a pizza and beer joint. My son used to go to the pizza place down the street. There are always kids at the table, but there's also 21 and 22-year olds. So those guys will pass back a beer to the table. So that's interesting. I tell you a quick story along this answering this question. We have a
Mhm.
security guard at times at some of our restaurants and bars, and security guard, it was an off-duty Fulton a police cop, real sharp guy. He didn't want to like bust anybody, right? But there's a table of half and halves, right? There's some 22-year-olds and there's some probably 20-year-olds, and they sort of got sat down and they're serving each other drinks. So what he does is he walks over to the table of adults right next to that table, and he starts carding them because he knows they're all of age. And you see this table of kids and 20-year-olds just leave. So there's so many brilliant ways to handle, compliance. And at that point, he didn't want to get into the whole, hey, you're 18, should be doing. It was like, dude, I'm coming for you next, but I'm giving you a chance to leave. Yeah, it's got to start from the top. I think you've got to have an alcohol policy. You've got to have a piece of paper that says to your bartender or your server, you're not going to be, uh, you're not going to be, handing off alcohol to anybody without making sure that you check their ID. You're not going to be drinking on the job. You know, going to be. It's just you spell out. There's probably about 20 different things on our alcohol policy. You sit them down when they get hired, and you make them sign it, and then you review it a little later. We talked about the Danny Meyer, constant gentle pressure, but it's not really gentle. You've got to. There's got to be some pretty hard pressure, and then if they mess up, they got to get dinged. Either let go or demoted. It's not a. It's not. They didn't just move the salt shaker to the wrong place. They're risking so much. Risking lives. So yeah, it's got to start from the top. You got to have an alcohol policy. Then you got to have training. RAS classes are a must. Responsible alcohol seller server classes. And then you've got to have what we do along with the RAS classes is we staying our own bartenders. We have, and that's how it started. We would use a service here in Atlanta, and we hired that group to come in and try to get carded from our bartenders. And if they didn't card, then we failed. We took care of it. But that worked so well. I didn't like a few things about the way that company was doing it. So then I was like, okay, let's build a better mousetrap and let's see if we can scale this with some technology that we can do it, all over the nation. So that's what happened there. And that's just basically a simple ID check. So we will bring in 21, 22, 23-year-old kids. I call them kids, 60 now. So to ask for, a Coors Light or whatever. And it works famously because all our crew around here has seen the effects of it, because invariably someone won't card somebody the sticker and they will fail. And here's this bartender that gets demoted down to barback or gets let go. So that's part of the process. Starts from the top. Got to have an alcohol policy. You got to have education, and then you got to make sure that your crew is doing what they're doing. And the owner and managers can't be there all the time. It's just impossible. And I know for a fact. I mean, I go out with I've got some 20-year-olds that work for me, and we'll go out to lunch. They're not getting carded. And these are some of the best of the best restaurants in the nation. They're just not getting carded. So everybody can use this type of service.
Well, 100%. I think the one part there too that's really important to highlight is you actually make sure people have consequences to their actions.
Yeah.
Right? Because a lot of places will talk about this. They'll say, oh, you have to ID everybody. Oh, you have to do this. Oh, you have to do that. But when it doesn't happen, there aren't strict consequences. And I hate to say it, but on something of this magnitude for a business with the safety issues that exist for the public and the just business life issues that exist, right? Because you can be out of business if you don't do this.
Right.
Being that strict is almost necessary.
Yeah, you can't. So my district manager, who worked at he worked at all the Bennigan's and all these great restaurants. He's my age. He always says you can't unsee something. If I walk in, I've walked into the bar and I've seen a bar back drinking a beer that he had under the back bar. I'm like 5 feet away from that. I can't unsee that. I'm not going to ignore that. Walk into another bar and there's a remote bar and the kid's sipping a margarita. Those guys are gone just like that. And so other people see that that's what's going to happen. So then it becomes a zero. It's just they know not to do it unless they get really crafty.
Well, and that's the thing, right? People do and I hate to say that, but people do get kind of crafty. And now I know one of the problems though, when we have like a zero tolerance policy towards not IDing and a zero tolerance policy, some of this you'll hear people say, well, that gets in the way of hospitality. That gets in the way of taking care of your guests because you're IDing them and you're hassling them for IDs and you're changing the experience. Now, obviously, I think both of us would say that's a terrible way to think about that.
Right.
But how do we avoid pissing people off while working on compliance at that level?
Yeah, I think part of that becomes, unfortunately, I think it's the customer. I think you're just going to get some bad seeds. Most people that come to a bar realize that they're going to get carded.
Mhm.
It's those people that still latch onto their vertical ID when they're 23 years old, or latch onto an expired ID, or come in with some pieces of paper that are just, this is my, Hawaiian, car. I don't know. It's just, and then we have to research it. We have to get the book out. We have to scan it. We have to look at some other ID. It's like, come on, you're coming to a bar. Just have your stuff ready. So, but I get it. So then you get a couple of people that probably do have a legitimate ID, and it's let's say it's from Michigan, and we're looking at it. We're like, oh man, it's kind of beat up, so worn out. So we're scanning it, and they look younger. Yeah, that then it becomes you just have to apologize. You just have to, but that's very rare. A lot of our 1-star reviews are of people that went through our gauntlet, and I would say most of them are the ones that failed and that legitimately had a fake ID that we confiscated. And they just get on the Yelp or whatever and they 1 star, rah, so we live with that. That's okay. So we're proud of our 1-star reviews. But we're using a scanner now too. So there's not one method that works. It's just there's not you know a panacea, if you will. There's not one method that works. You've got to. It's almost like the art of compliance. On the fake IDs, you've got to know some tells, and it's impossible to know everything wrong with every other state. I would say first start with the state that you're in, really nail down that ID, and then what you learn from that, our Georgia ID, what you learn from that Georgia ID may actually transfer over to other IDs. At least you know the nomenclature and the definitions. You know what a ghost is. You know what a hologram is. You know what micro whatever. You know what laminate. And then you start looking for features. Now you know the language. Now you can kind of go and say, okay, well, we see a lot of North Carolina IDs. So then you pick up the North Carolina one. You start looking at that. But I think the scanners are getting better and better these days. They're not 100%. I think our scanner is probably, I would say, 85% accurate. And so you just use all these tools that you have, and signage is another one. Just make sure when they come in, they see signs. Yes, we don't take vertical IDs. But yes, we confiscate. It's illegal. And then seeing if the kids see that we are carding, then they'll usually turn around and go somewhere else. You'll see them kind of huddling 30 feet from your property line. What's our strategy? Like you could have talked about it a mile away. We see you now.
Yeah, it's not the best place to plot, is it? So that's interesting, and I think that's it's true, and it's interesting because I asked about hospitality, and kind of in the process you rephrase that to, well, why are they just being dicks and coming in and doing something wrong? But that is really the way to look at it, isn't it?
Yeah, you got to back up your bartenders. I mean,
Yeah.
and we do. Try to give them the tools and try to say, hey, you did the right thing. But they know. I mean, if once again, it's the culture. We give $20 for every fake ID found.
Okay.
So I'm not in all our bars all the time, so I can't get out there. But district manager, other owners, they do this too. But I'll go up to the new bartenders and I'll just make sure. I'll say, look, I just want you to know the most important thing to me as the owner. I'm not here all the time, and I don't hover, but don't serve anybody underage. Check
Mhm.
IDs under 40. That you're going to get. You're going to win my heart by doing that. And then I'll say, listen, I want you to get a fake ID. Get a fake ID in 2 weeks. Try to do that, and they do. It's kind of cool to see them, and then when they do, they're real happy about it. And so they start maintaining that. You know what? I kind of hate the minor in my bar. I'm gonna get them, and I'm gonna make $20 in the process.
Now, one question on that, because I know some people take fake IDs, some people don't. And there's always the fear, at least I've always had the fear of, if I confiscate your fake ID and I'm wrong, I just did something really bad.
Yeah, yeah.
So, do you have any advice on that side of it?
Yeah, so, know your law, know your state law because it's not every state allows you to confiscate an ID. It is personal property. Look, I'm no lawyer, but some of our guys will say, "Well, listen, we'll just we'll call 911 and we'll let them sort it out." But that's what we say usually. And then if they're not 100% still asking for the ID at that point,
Hmm.
you call their bluff, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So we take it, and mostly are they are somewhat nervous kids trying to do it. They're, I want to say, somewhat privileged kids because sometimes their parents come back in and try to get their IDs back, which
Hmm.
just blows my mind. We've had some kids try to buy their ID back. What can I do to get my ID back? Because probably, I don't know what they are, 100 something bucks for a couple of them. I don't know.
I've been out of college too long to
Yeah,
know.
yeah,
And I mean, I probably should not admit this, but you did earlier. I had other tricks too, right? Like there was, for me, a fake ID was not the way to get booze. It was older
yeah,
friends was normally
sure.
the path.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So turning now a little bit more towards stinger compliance, how exactly does your program work? And talk to us a little bit about that and how you're working with other bars to help them with their compliance.
Yeah, it's super easy. I hate to be that guy that says we've Uberized this process, but that's what we've done. We're on iOS with a nice application. We've got our website. We've got people that will get on the phone and help. But basically, if I'm a bar owner, I'll just I'll just jump on the website and set something up. We'll contact you. We'll figure out what your needs are. We have ways to do more of a bespoken type of a customize. If you want a certain set of hours and a certain set of days, that will come and check. We'll check multiple bar tenders. But for the most part, what I recommend for bars and restaurants is twice a month, during peak hour, and see what happens. What's going to happen is that once the word is out, you may only need to go down to once a month, but if you
Mhm.
got multiple locations and multiple bartenders, it is a good idea to do at least two per month. But yeah, our stingers will just come out incognito. They're 22, 23, 24, 25. They'll go to the convenience store and pick up a Coors Light, or they'll sit at the bar and pick up a Coors Light. A lot of the other groups will throw down a red card or a green card to indicate whether that server has failed or passed. We don't do that. We don't want to show our faces. We want to still be incognito. We want to be able to come back a week later or 2 weeks later. We'll still mix it up, but we also don't want to throw a wrench into the. We don't want to be the guy that tells the bartender you just failed. That's the manager's job. That's the district manager's job. That needs to happen at their own course of action, and so that's basically it. Super easy. And then we're a little bit of a secret shopper because some of our clients will ask, hey, while you're there, can you tell me if the bathrooms are clean? Can you tell me if someone came over to you in 30 seconds? Or was it 2 minutes, or did they know the menu? So we have the ability. So Truck and Tap used to use a secret shopper, and that was just like 150 questions of stuff that we didn't even look at. We just wanted kind of like a handful, an encapsulation of things that were important to us. So we're adding this to our service here, fully focused on the alcohol and tobacco compliance of anybody selling, at the retail level. But we're also throwing in a little customer optics. I mean, sorry, customer experience type of thing. So tiny bit of secret shopper alongside of the compliance side.
And for the record, just so that everybody that's listening knows, it's you're you're looking at retail and bars and restaurants on this, and you're also looking at not just booze, but also like tobacco, lottery, all that as
Yeah,
well,
yeah.
correct?
Anything that's age restricted, right? We're not going to get into the guns, but
That's probably smart.
yeah. But this happens on the tobacco side a lot, and that's
Mhm.
definitely an area we're focusing on.
Well, I know there are less bars now that sell tobacco products, but historically, bars have always sold tobacco,
Yeah,
and that's a big piece of the compliance there.
the cigarette machine. Remember the cigarette
Yeah.
machine?
I mean, I had one for
Yeah,
years.
yeah.
And actually, and I'd be lying if I told you I made a lot of money selling cigarettes.
I'm sure you did. Yeah.
Like it was a good business back in the day.
I want to remember that there was a lever just to get matches out too, right? Couldn't you just like pull a lever and some matches would come out?
On the
Maybe this
old
is,
school ones, yeah.
maybe
On
I'm
the
going back to the 70s. Yeah, yeah,
You are,
yeah.
because mine was just one of the like chip machines with the screw,
Oh, okay, yeah, yeah,
and I used that for cigarettes because I couldn't get a cool one like you're talking about in 2008,
yeah,
2009.
yeah, yeah. I'm going back to when I was riding around on my bike and I wanted some matches for some fireworks. So yeah,
Well, and that's also though at that point you could probably walk into a bar too because that's when the laws were a little laxer than they are
yeah.
today.
I would walk into the back of a bar and play Space Invaders. Yeah, I remember those days.
And now if a kid did that in your bar, you'd kick them out quicker than they
Yeah,
knew what
yeah.
was going
We
on.
hate minors.
But that's just it's culture changes, right? And that's part of what is true here with all this compliance stuff. And with alcohol, if you think about the 70s to today, it has all changed. How much the dram shop laws are impacting the industry, how much the attorneys come after us if something bad
Yeah,
happens. Right? Like we're in a much more litigious society, unfortunately, I want to say, than back then. And that means all this compliance stuff just becomes more and more important.
yeah, and that's a great point because what we're doing, we're building a case for bars and restaurants and convenience stores, grocery stores, whoever, of doing the right thing. This becomes a lever that they can pull in case they do have to go to court. They can say, we sting our own people 2 times a month. And for that matter, we have passed X amount of times. And that just becomes proof positive that, you're doing the right thing. You're not being negligent. In fact, you're being the opposite.
Well, and I'm sure that also helps for things like insurance, just being able to tell the insurance companies that you're doing that, or even with excise themselves, right? Because I've always found with government compliance folks, because they're just normal people as much as they might seem evil to us at certain points, they just want to do their job. And if we help them do their job,
Right.
they give us a little more grace
Yeah.
on when we screw up a tiny bit.
Yeah. 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 I would love to see insurance companies take this type of compliance tool and help restaurants and bars and convenience stores lower their insurance burden because this works. Just like responsible alcohol seller service classes, RAS classes help, and they require that. That this seems to be something that should be required too.
Well, it just makes sense, right? Because it's the classes are great, but as we all know, training without follow up
Right.
doesn't stick. And
Right.
so this is the follow up to that training.
Yeah.
Now, with that, we're running out of time for today. But is there anything else at all, Cliff, that you would like to add?
No, just bars, restaurants. You just got to do the right thing. I mean, I think overall, it's making sure that if you care about this and you pass it on to your crew, then they'll care about it. But you quickly know what restaurants and bars don't really care about it because you see the kids leaving your place and going there. So it's very interesting. So stay vigilant. You don't want to fail at this level. Yeah, you can fail at moving the salt shaker, but don't fail at not carding the kid and kicking him out of your bar. I guess that's what I can say.
Well, and I think that's a great kind of way to wrap all this up. Now, for people that are listening and they're saying, hey, this sounds like an interesting program. I want to learn more. Where can people go to learn more about you and Stinger Compliance?
Yeah, it's simple, stingercompliance.com. Yeah, right there. We're on LinkedIn. We're everywhere. Instagram. Bring
Perfect.
it
So
on.
we'll put those links down in the show notes. So if you're listening and want to find out more, you can just scroll down and click on the link. We'll also throw a link on there for Truck and Tap in case you want to check out
Yeah, cool.
Cliff's bars and what he has going on. So with that, Cliff, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate the conversation and just thank you for your time.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thank you very much. We'll see you.
That about wraps it up for today. If you enjoyed today's insights, make sure you like, subscribe, and leave a review. If you are ready to take your bar to the next level, schedule a strategy session with me by clicking the link in the show notes below. Until next time, have a great day, and we will talk again later.